The revolutionary leader was freed by thousands of his people, only to be killed hours later in the most tragic way possible. Maurice Bishop was 39 years old when he died on October 19, 1983. But his death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a betrayal that destroyed an entire revolution. Maurice Bishop led Grenada, a tiny Caribbean island, for 4 years. He gave people free healthcare, free education, and hope for a better future. He stood up to America and spoke for poor countries around the world. But then members of his own party turned on him. They put him under house arrest. When thousands of people marched to free him, he thought he was safe. He wasn't. Just hours after being freed, Maurice Bishop was executed by a firing squad. His partner Jacqueline Creft, who was also the Minister of Education, was killed right beside him. 7 others died with them. The betrayal didn't just kill Maurice Bishop, it killed the Grenada Revolution and gave America the excuse to invade. Let's talk about who Maurice Bishop really was, what he built, and why his own people turned against him. Maurice Rupert Bishop was born on May 29, 1944 on the island of Aruba. Aruba wasn't independent back then. It belonged to the Netherlands. His parents, Rupert and Alimenta Bishop, were from Grenada originally. They went to Aruba looking for work because life in Grenada was really hard. Rupert worked in the oil fields and made very little money. Just 5 British pence per day. That's almost nothing. Life was a struggle, but Rupert was determined to give his family something better. In 1950, when Maurice was 6 years old, the family moved back to Grenada. The island was doing better economically at that time, and Rupert wanted Maurice to get a good education. Maurice grew up in Grenada and turned out to be a really smart kid. He did excellent in school. His father was strict and pushed him hard. Rupert demanded perfect grades from Maurice. Even when the family got a car, Maurice's mother made him walk to school like all the other kids. They didn't want him to think he was special or better than anyone else. Maurice got one of only 4 government scholarships to attend Presentation Brothers College, a Catholic secondary school. This was a big deal. It meant he was one of the smartest students in the whole country. At school, Maurice got involved in everything. He became president of the student council. He ran the discussion club and the history study group. He edited the school newspaper called Student Voice. He played sports. And most importantly, he got really interested in politics, history, and sociology. Maurice loved learning about how societies work and how they could be made better. He was really excited about the West Indies Federation that was created in 1958. This was an attempt to unite all the Caribbean islands into one country. Maurice believed in Caribbean nationalism, the idea that all Caribbean people should work together. He also became fascinated by the Cuban Revolution in 1959 when Fidel Castro took power. Maurice read everything he could about it, even though the newspapers in Grenada were controlled by the colonial government and said bad things about Cuba. He didn't care what they said. He wanted to know the truth. In 1963, when Maurice was 19, he left Grenada and went to London, England to study law at the University of London. This is where his political views really developed. He got involved with the West Indian Students' Union and the Standing Conference of West Indian Organizations. These were groups of Caribbean students in Britain who talked about independence, anti-colonialism, and how to fix the problems in their home countries. Maurice was influenced by reading books by Kwame Nkrumah, the leader who freed Ghana from British rule. He read Frantz Fanon, who wrote about how colonialism damaged people psychologically. He read Malcolm X, Fidel Castro, and Che Guevara. All these revolutionary thinkers shaped how Maurice saw the world. He finished his law degree and practiced law in London for 2 years. In 1966, he married a nurse named Angela Redhead. They would have 2 children together, John born in 1967 and Nadia born in 1969. In 1970, Maurice returned to Grenada. This was a critical time. The Black Power movement was spreading through the Caribbean. Young black people were standing up and demanding change. They were tired of white people and light-skinned elites controlling everything. They were tired of poverty and corruption. Maurice opened a law practice in St. George's, the capital of Grenada. But he didn't just practice law. He got involved in politics immediately. Grenada had become independent from Britain in 1974. But the new leader was a man named Eric Gairy. And Eric Gairy was a disaster. He was corrupt. He was brutal. He used a private gang called the Mongoose Gang to beat up and intimidate anyone who opposed him. He was paranoid and strange, obsessed with UFOs. He spent government money on ridiculous things while regular people suffered. Maurice Bishop became one of the main opposition figures fighting against Gary. He organized protests. He defended workers' rights. He represented people who were arrested for standing up to the government. Gary's Mongoose Gang beat Maurice up several times. They targeted him specifically because he was effective and people listened to him. But Maurice wouldn't stop. In 1972, Maurice helped organize a conference in Martinique where Caribbean activists planned strategies for liberation movements. He was influenced by Julius Nyerere and his ideas about Tanzanian socialism. Maurice helped create the Movement for Assemblies of the People, known as MAP. This group wanted to build power at the village level so regular people could participate in government decisions, not just rich elites. In January 1973, MAP merged with two other groups called JUL and ORAL. Together they formed the new JUL movement. The name JUL stood for Joint Endeavor for Welfare, Education, and Liberation. Maurice Bishop became one of the leaders of this new movement. Jacqueline Kreft, who would later become his longtime partner, was also one of the co-founders. The new JUL movement had clear goals. They wanted to end corruption. They wanted real democracy where regular people had a say. They wanted better education and healthcare. They wanted to develop Grenada's economy so people could have decent jobs. And they wanted Grenada to be truly independent, not controlled by Britain, America, or anyone else. By 1979, things in Grenada were getting worse under Eric Gary. The economy was failing. Crime was rising. Gary was becoming more paranoid and violent. Maurice Bishop and the new JUL movement decided they had to act. On March 13, 1979, while Gary was out of the country attending a United Nations meeting in New York, Maurice Bishop and his comrades launched a revolution. It was bloodless. No one was killed. The people of Grenada supported it overwhelmingly. Maurice Bishop, at age 34, became the Prime Minister of Grenada. The People's Revolutionary Government was born. The changes Maurice Bishop made were incredible. The revolution gave Grenada free healthcare for everyone. Before the revolution, poor people couldn't afford doctors. Now, they could get medical treatment without paying. The revolution created free education. More schools were built. Adult literacy programs were launched so older people who never learned to read could finally get that chance. The literacy rate jumped dramatically. The revolution gave women equal pay for equal work, which was radical for that time. Women got maternity leave. Laws were passed to protect workers' rights. Unemployment dropped significantly as the government created jobs. The revolution started building proper housing for people who lived in shacks. The revolution also started constructing Grenada's first real international airport at Point Salines. This was crucial because Grenada relied on tourism, but the old airport couldn't handle big planes. Cuba sent workers and engineers to help build it. Maurice Bishop traveled around the world building relationships. He went to Cuba and developed a close friendship with Fidel Castro. He went to Eastern European countries. He went to African nations. He was building connections so Grenada could get support and trade deals. But there was one country that hated what Maurice Bishop was doing: the United States of America. The Reagan administration saw Grenada as a communist threat. They didn't like that Bishop was friends with Castro. They didn't like that Grenada had socialist policies. And they especially didn't like that a small black Caribbean nation was showing that an alternative to capitalism could actually work and improve people's lives. The US government spread propaganda about Grenada. They claimed Cuba was building military bases there, which wasn't true. They claimed the Soviet Union was going to use Grenada to attack America, which was ridiculous. They pressured tourism companies to stop bringing Americans to Grenada. They tried to economically isolate the island, but Maurice Bishop kept pushing forward. In June 1983, Maurice was invited to the United States by Trans-Africa and the Congressional Black Caucus. He spoke at Hunter College in Brooklyn, New York. Thousands of people showed up to hear him speak. The crowd went wild. Maurice gave an incredible speech defending Grenada's revolution. He compared it to the American Revolution and the Emancipation Proclamation. He talked about how poor countries were still economically controlled by rich Western nations. He criticized America for overthrowing Salvador Allende in Chile and for supporting the violent Contras against Nicaragua. And then he said something powerful. He explained why the Reagan administration really hated Grenada. It wasn't about communism or Cuba or the Soviet Union. It was because Grenadians were black, English-speaking, and showing that revolution could work. If Grenada succeeded, it could inspire 30 million Black Americans to demand change too. That speech in June 1983 would be Maurice Bishop's last international address. Because back in Grenada, serious problems were developing inside his own party. A faction led by Deputy Prime Minister Bernard Coard was plotting against him. Bernard Coard was a very different person from Maurice Bishop. Coard had studied Marxism in Jamaica and saw himself as the real intellectual theorist of the revolution. He thought Maurice was too soft, too focused on popularity, not disciplined enough. Coard wanted a more rigid communist system modeled after the Soviet Union. Maurice believed in working with the people, listening to them, mobilizing them. Coard believed in giving orders from the top down. The two men had fundamentally different visions. In September 1983, the tensions exploded. Coard and his faction demanded that Maurice Bishop either step down or agree to share power with Coard in a joint leadership arrangement. They claimed Maurice wasn't ideologically pure enough. They said he was making mistakes. Maurice thought about it for a couple weeks. Then he rejected the proposal. He wasn't going to give up power to someone whose vision he disagreed with. The people of Grenada supported Maurice, not Coard, but Coard's faction controlled key positions in the army and security forces. On October 13, 1983, Bernard Coard and his allies placed Maurice Bishop under house arrest. They accused him of spreading rumors about Coard and dividing the party. When word got out that Maurice Bishop was under house arrest, the people of Grenada were outraged. Thousands of people poured into the streets demanding his release. They loved Maurice Bishop. He was their leader. He had given them healthcare and education and hope. On October 19, 1983, a massive crowd marched to the house where Maurice was being held. They freed him. Maurice Bishop was released by the people. He then led the crowd to Fort Rupert, the army headquarters in St. George's. He thought he could rally military support and take back control of the government. But Bernard Coard's faction had already made their decision. They sent troops loyal to them to Fort Rupert. When the soldiers arrived, they opened fire on the crowd. People scattered in terror. Maurice Bishop, Jacqueline Kraft, and 7 others were captured. They were lined up against a wall, and a firing squad executed all of them. Maurice Bishop was 39 years old. Jacqueline Kraft, his partner in the Minister of Education, was also 39. They died together. The other victims included cabinet ministers Eunice and Whiteman, Fitzroy Bain, Norris Bain, and Vincent Noel, as well as Union leader Evelyn Bullen and Bishop's personal security guards. The murder of Maurice Bishop was a catastrophic mistake by Coard and his faction. The Grenadian people were horrified. International reaction was intense. Cuba condemned the killing. Fidel Castro called it a tragedy and a betrayal. The Soviet Union was shocked. Socialist governments around the world distanced themselves from Coard, and the United States saw an opportunity. 6 days later, on October 25, 1983, President Ronald Reagan ordered Operation Urgent Fury. The US military invaded Grenada. Reagan claimed American medical students on the island were in danger and needed to be rescued. That was mostly an excuse. The real goal was to destroy what was left of the Grenadian Revolution. About 7,000 US troops invaded the tiny island of 100,000 people. The fighting lasted a few days. 19 American soldiers died. 45 Grenadian soldiers died. Dozens of Cuban workers who were helping build the airport fought back and several were killed. The invasion was condemned by the United Nations, but it didn't matter. The US had won. Bernard Coard and his allies were arrested. They were eventually tried and convicted of murdering Maurice Bishop and the others. Coard spent decades in prison. The People's Revolutionary Government was destroyed. Grenada returned to being a traditional capitalist democracy closely aligned with the United States. Everything Maurice Bishop had built was dismantled. Maurice Bishop left behind his ex-wife Angela Redhead and their 2 children, John and Nadia. Angela had moved with the children to Toronto, Canada in 1981 while Maurice was still Prime Minister. Their marriage had fallen apart, though they never officially divorced. Maurice also left behind a 3rd child, a son named Vladimir Lenin Kraft Bishop. Vladimir was born in 1978 to Maurice and Jacqueline Kraft. After both his parents were killed, Vladimir went to Canada to live with his half-siblings. But Vladimir's life ended in tragedy too. In 1994, at just 16 years old, Vladimir was stabbed to death in a Toronto nightclub. So Maurice Bishop's legacy includes 3 children, but one of them died young in senseless violence. Just like his father, the lessons from Maurice Bishop's story are complex. Revolution is dangerous. Power corrupts. Ideological purity can lead to violence. External pressure from powerful countries can destroy movements for change. But also, change is possible. A small poor island stood up to the most powerful country in the world. Poor people got healthcare and education they never had before. A black Caribbean nation showed that alternatives to capitalism could work, at least for a while. That's why the story of Maurice Bishop still matters today. He represented hope. He represented resistance. He represented the idea that poor people deserve better. And he died for those beliefs. That's the tragic legacy of Maurice Bishop, the revolutionary leader who was freed by his people only to be killed hours later by those who claimed to share his vision. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think about Maurice Bishop's incredible and tragic story.